Good morning or good afternoon, John, from the US to the UK. Thank you for being patient, and we're excited to talk about how art and advocacy really come together, especially through your cartoons. So there's a title slide, but John doesn't really need any introduction. And John and I met in 2016. John, can you introduce yourself to the audience and describe what you do?
Yeah, I'm John Curtis. I've been a cartoonist, editorial cartoonist for the past 20 odd years. But my passion is social justice issues. I regard myself as an activist more than a cartoonist. I use cartooning as a platform.
John, and thank you for working early in the morning and late at night on this. I wanted to look back at 2016 to give our viewers a perspective of how we first started with our PowerPoints. And I found you online, and I saw that you did really strong political cartoons. And asbestos has been a tough issue for everyone in the US and around the world. In fact, Fernanda, yesterday I showed her one of your new cartoons that we'll display, and she got it in a millisecond. You don't have to speak the language to understand what you're saying. John, I'd love for you to talk about how we set these things up and what you produced at the end.
Yeah, so I think it's really been wonderful working with you, because you have a good head for cartoons, and although we do a lot of toing and froing in the development of them, I love the way they've come out. So in this one, we've got an old sickly man sitting in a chair. You can see he's got breathing apparatus and big oxygen tanks behind him. He's in a wheelchair, and he's looking worse for wear, and he's saying in a big green speech bubble to show his the illness. He's showing millions have died, poisoned by a hidden killer that lurks everywhere, and he's saying this to a Captain America figure, who says, "That sounds like asbestos. That's not a job for me. It's one for the EPA." Which sort of took us straight to the point where that you wanted to make, which is this is something that needed to be addressed urgently by the EPA. And the tagline, which is something we developed for you guys, and we've used it often in our cartoons for social justice since, is putting a tagline and then a website, which is a call to action for readers who want to learn more. And on the tagline at the bottom, we just said, "Hear asbestos, think prevention," which I think sort of drove home the point that you wanted to make. This was another cartoon that was very much a collaboration between the two of us. We introduced the personification, as it were, of the chloralkali monster, and to sort of represent the target of the cartoon. And in this version of the cartoon, she's saying everybody agrees that asbestos kills and must be banned, because there did seem to be a consensus of opinion that eventually that this is what needs to happen. But unfortunately, there were the stragglers and the big chloralkali companies were the exception to the rule, and that's what this cartoon illustrates. The big monster saying, "Well, not everybody."
Yeah, thank you for giving context to that cartoon, John. It's interesting because that file box represents the EPA docket of where we all submitted comments, where we urge the EPA to prioritize asbestos, and you'll hear more about the EPA's rule and regulatory process tomorrow with ADAO Counsel Bob Sussman. The third slide in the 26 series shows a gentleman in bed, and this was a really hard one for us to do. I actually didn't want to show this one, to be honest with you, John. It reminded me of Alan and too many other people, and I didn't know if politically this would just turn someone's face away and walk from the issue. But I've come back to knowing that this is a proper message and needs to be seen. So clearly you took the pain, and if you were able to watch Ignacio and Fernandez session and others, you know that we have all suffered. So I'm sure it's hard as a graphic political cartoonist to take this message, but I think you did an excellent job, even though it was difficult for me to share. Any thoughts about this 2016 death cartoon?
Sure. You know, uh, there are a lot of areas where editorial cartoons need to go, and it's impossible to extract any humor out of them. So not all cartoons are funny, obviously, and this certainly isn't a funny one. In fact, none of them are, but but we need to sort of find an interesting angle to come at them from. And I think this does serve the purpose, and I think you've been appreciate how personal this cartoon is for you. But I think you appreciate how it does drive the message home, and it helps readers understand the severity of the message that we're trying to get across.
You helped us a lot in 2016. I know in 2022, your help and your artistic talent is going to bring our message home again. So we began talking about having you join for this art and advocacy session. You brought in a South African cartoonist, and I loved how 3 continents came together to produce the next 4 political cartoons for 2024. Why don't you introduce the sketch process, how I kind of throw out some ideas and a direction, and then you incorporate. This was to update the 2016 Gina McCarthy slide with EPA Administrator now, which is Michael Regan.
Yes, well, just to pick up on the introduction of the cartoonist that we used for this series of cartoons, his name is Themba Siwela, and he's a Zulu-speaking cartoonist based in Johannesburg, South Africa. He and I go back 20 years. Is it not quite 20 years? To 2004, when we were selected amongst a group of emerging cartoonists to travel to the UK and meet all the cartoonists here. And we were all based in South Africa there. There were 4 of us that traveled. And we've since built careers as editorial cartoonists together, but I haven't collaborated with him for a while. So this was a lovely project to get back onto the drawing board with Themba. And how we work is I conceptualize, I talk to the clients, and I try and get an understanding of the message. And I conceptualize the ideas, and the brilliant artists are the cartoonist collaborators that I work with. I'm not as good an artist as any of these guys, and it's turned out really well. As you said earlier, this cartoon is really an update of the previous one, where we brought Michael Regan in, put him in the chair representing the EPA. And unfortunately, in all the time that's passed between the 2 iterations of this cartoon, the circumstances haven't changed. The chloralkali industry is still the exception to the rule, and they're still standing there like a big threatening monster.
So we're going to introduce, this is a sketch of one of the first 4. You're just going to get a sample of how our sketches have changed. So I loved how we were able to collaborate on this. It shows the beginnings. This is our final moonshot slide. We know that asbestos-caused diseases can be prevented and eliminated if we stop mining and using asbestos and work on legacy. So we're really excited about sharing this latest first slide in the series. Clearly, President Biden and his wife Jill have a strong message. Spend a minute, John, and set this up, please.
Yes, well, the timing worked well for us because on Monday, President Biden, I guess he relaunched his Cancer Moonshot campaign. He'd spoken of it before, but there was a big relaunch, so it worked well for the timing of this cartoon. And in it, Themba's drawn the president and his wife standing on the roof balcony of the White House, looking out towards the moon, and him saying, "Our moonshot is to halve cancer deaths by 2047. Where do we start? And Jill Biden reminds him, she says, ADAO says ban asbestos now, and she's holding the program for this very conference that we're attending.
So now we can see EPA Administrator Michael Regan. The inbox is still full with all of our docket comments that say it's time to ban asbestos. Nothing has changed about the chlor-alkali industry from 2016, John, as you mentioned. In fact, they are lobbying for a permanent exemption, even though they have started to transition from asbestos technology to non-asbestos technology. We look forward to sending these cartoons over to the EPA's way. This gives you a sketch. This was a really tough one, I think, to map out without causing a legal problem. It was important for me that we get a cartoon. In fact, Fernanda got this one straight away. We want people to understand that there are 3 companies operating in the chlor-alkali industry that have a small amount of plants, only 8, that import asbestos, as it's been said, Russia, China, and Brazil, for these U.S. companies. So we sketched out how can we tell the message of the 3 companies, the 8 plants, and the money and the corruption that we see in Washington and elsewhere.
Linda mentioned the fact that a lot of these companies send representatives to your conferences to make notes or to spy on what's being said about them, and so I used that idea to imagine them actually coming into the registration of a conference of a real life in-person conference, and the person at the desk calling them out and saying, "Who's this? The American Chemistry Council. I don't have you amongst our trusted delegates. What are your credentials?" And the cartoon shows what their credentials are. They're carrying folders that are labeled lies, spin, and BS, and they've got piles of money sticking out, pouring out of their briefcases and pockets and everything.
Yeah, I love how this turned out, John.
Pretty much tells the story.
I love how you did an excellent job. Let's go to the last slide. This was an early morning concept for me, and Timbo was working in South Africa, you in the UK, and we were able to graphically put these ideas to paper. Let's set this one up, please. And by the way, Earl's photograph of the Louisiana chlor-alkali plant is the background that Timba and John used. Talk to us, John.
Yes, and that photograph was wonderful, and I saw Earl talking earlier on this at this conference, and I'm glad we were that he was inadvertently he was a collaborator in this cartoon, because it was a great photograph. It just set this up perfectly, and you'd spoken about a lot about how environmental racism plays a huge part in this whole fight that you're fighting, and you'd spoken about wanting to do a cartoon about this. In fact, much of this cartoon was conceptualized by you. We just pulled it together, I think, with that great photograph, and we obviously used the those big drums, I'm not too sure what they're called, the containers, to represent the chlor-alkali industry. So that became a handy thing to label. And the little girl is walking with her dad, and she says, and she's coughing because of all the pollutants behind them, which represent the pollution that runs right throughout their whole process. And she says, "Daddy, don't they know that their chemicals are making us sick and killing us?" And he says, "Yes, my child, they do. Environmental racism is a very real thing," which I think is a hard hitting point that's left with this cartoon.
You and Tim did an excellent job. When we talk about environmental racism, obviously, and human rights violations. Those just aren't buzzwords for ADAO. We've spent 18 years trying to counter those issues, and so has Fernanda and many other experts that you'll hear from today, as well as tomorrow. So, John, you did a phenomenal job. I truly want to thank both of you and Timba for working so hard. Who would have thought in a matter of 7 days we could crank out those 4? And you did a remarkable job. So sincere thanks from ADAO, and we look forward to sharing your cartoons throughout this entire conference and linking up again to promote environment action, art, advocacy, and action to put the chlor-alkali industry under a bright light. I bet we're thinking about a new cartoon with that one.
Well, it's been a pleasure working with you. It has always been, and you know, the lovely thing about working with activists is the passion that comes through, and the sense of purpose that activists have, and so we'd love to carry on working with you. We enjoyed it just as much as you did.
John, you're a rock star in my world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Linda. Take care.
Bye.
All the best for the rest of the conference.
Thank you.